if you have cards, some will be coming around collecting them. I will then shuffle them. And there's a handout back there. It's a Learn More handout. If you want to read the legal documents on the Dryden case, they're all at the Court of Appeals website, which is in the handout. You can Google it up. Deborah told me that the last round, Tom West, the other lawyer, submitted 160 pages. She submitted 60 pages. This is dense stuff, and these were not the first brief. So, but it's all there. That's the source documentation. That's what the judges will be looking at. The other thing that's on here is a debate between Deborah Goldberg and Tom West. Tom West is the oil and gas attorney who is, he's the complainant, the plaintiff, who's challenging the Dryden decision, the Dryden law, sorry. And the last item is a relatively short article by Tom Wilbur in his blog site. So there's a bunch of handouts back there at the table. You can pick that up if you want to. And let's see. There's a wonderful paper by a guy named Scobie and a bunch of other people it's commonly called the 2030 New York State Plan. It's an engineering feasibility plan. I think it's about 65 pages long. I'm a distant author, fourth, fifth author, something like that, with Howarth and Graphia. Jacobson is the lead author. He's a scientist at Stanford University. Again, very wonky stuff. Was criticized for not getting into the political feasibility of doing a complete conversion for New York State to renewable energy. We never intended it to be that. It was an engineering feasibility study. There are all kinds of other pieces that need to be done with the politics, the finances, and so forth. So anyway, that's just a follow-on to what Joe said. I'm getting more cards, and we'll start with the Q&A. And I have one card that I can't read, and so I will try to read it first. If you identify it, then I'll give it back to you and try again. Printing helps. Does the ruling apply to both, I think, towns that something, police powers?
I can clarify, I think it was mine.
Okay, can I ask Sue to take that back to you and print it again? Okay, so now I've got a set. I'm going to shuffle these. No magic. It's not under the third P or anything like that. This is, by the way, we did this once before where all the card questions got answered. It was a debate up in Portland between Don Siegel and Tony Ingraffia. Sheila Cohen, who's back there, was the manager of that. I was one of the participants, the sub-managers helped to sort questions. We literally answered every question. There was no editing whatsoever, no categorizing. First question. Why has a supermajority been invoked on decisions related to fracking in some towns? For example, Sydney. Did you hear that, Joe?
There are at least a couple of occasions, a couple of sets of events that I know of that require supermajorities. So normally, for this type of vote, you would only need 3 of your 5 town board members. However, if you get a negative ruling from county planning, and this happens a lot because a number of county planning boards are not where we would like them to be, then if they say they don't recommend that you enact a zoning amendment, then you need a supermajority. There's also a rule in Germany, 20%, I think it is, of the citizens of a town petition the town board on any issue, then, so 20% of your town says, we're against that zoning amendment. That then raises the requirement to supermajority. And those are the 2 situations that I'm aware of. So,
that 20% of the people or of the land,
I can't
Oh,
hear.
I'm sorry, is that 20% of the people in the town or 20% of the own the land in the town?
Yeah.
We hear that sometimes.
I think it's 20% of the citizens.
No.
It should be.
No. If it's an
Yeah,
amendment,
we have our experts here. So.
the law we're talking about is the New York State Town Law 265. And it's basically 20% of the owners of affected land. So if you were doing something town-wide, like a zoning amendment or so forth, then it would be the entire town, or owners of the town. But if you were just doing something that affected less than the entire town, then it would just be the owners of basically land affected by that particular change.
Is there a basis for upstream watershed protection? This extends far beyond town borders. And in parentheses, I think about New York City, something police powers within their watershed. In other words, New York City has some special privileges, both with regard to the DEC's administrative decision-making so far, and there are others. They own certain rights to the watershed for New York City. So the question is there a basis for upstream watershed protection? This extends far beyond town borders.
Is this working? Good. I don't think you would be able to use zoning law for that purpose. It's not zoning law that is giving the special protections that New York City has. You would, my guess would be that you would need to work out some kind of arrangement with the folks who are around that upstream watershed to work with you for that protection. I don't know of any way that there's extraterritorial powers to protect the water supply.
There is, I mentioned that New York City has a special provision in DEC's administrative processing. So does Syracuse. The Syracuse watershed is also protected. Is that right, Joe?
Yes, we think this is one of Governor Cuomo's political decisions, that when he saw that people in New York City were beginning to understand fracking, and most of the state legislatures, the leaders are from New York City, the DEC suddenly figured out that fracking is not safe enough to be done in the New York City watershed. Then I talked with the mayor of Syracuse, and she wrote a letter because they have unfiltered water systems. They just collect the water. Ours comes from Skinny Atlas Lake. It comes from another other lakes, but they're unfiltered. Now, you can't filter out the damage of fracking, so there's a lot of scientific problems with this approach. But both New York City and Syracuse's drinking water system is exempt from fracking.
That is, it probably will be exempt from fracking. We don't have either an environmental impact statement or regulations, let alone any real laws on this yet. But that's the tentative plan. Next question, how to handle the shift of election vote issue from, quote, fracking to my landowner rights. I think what this is about is that several towns have supported resolutions in favor of property rights, property owner rights. The concept is, it's my land and damn it, I can do whatever I want with it, right? Versus things like zoning and so forth, and fracking. So how to handle the shift of election vote issue from fracking to my landowner rights. I could play with that a little bit, but you want me to? Okay, well, maybe I'm sorry I said that. The reason I said I could play with it a little bit, I was a bit involved in my town of Binghamton. There was an effort to pass a property rights resolution. I did not pull a copy of that, so I can't, and I didn't review that. But it was basically in favor of, pretty much it's my land, I can do what I want with it, and therefore this de facto moratorium, which has been going on for 5.5 years now, and any other restrictions such as the Syracuse watershed, New York City watershed, and so on and so forth, are impinging on my rights to have drilling in this case. There may be other rights. The folks that are very interested in this property rights issue talk about gun control, gun rights versus gun control, and you know, you can imagine a bunch of other things. How to handle the shift of the election vote issue. I don't know what to say to that other than what Joe said earlier about educate and agitate and organize and make clear to people that because you own a piece of land, you don't have unfettered rights to do anything you want with it. You may not, in fact, own the airspace above you if you notice that you've had a lot of trespassing lately because airliners are flying over that airspace. So there's also the issue of the land underneath you. Do you own all of that? Can you keep people away from it? Well, at this point, there is something called compulsory integration, which suggests that drillers can drill underneath you even though you don't wish that to happen. It only, I say it suggests that because there's some reason to think that the law there is not very good law. And that would be more work for the Lawyers and Accountants Relief Act of 2014 or whatever it will be. We're not going to see the end of this soon. Does the Court of Appeals look only at arguments raised on lower levels, or can new arguments be considered, such as evidence that had been overlooked? That is, how narrow is their scope?
So the Court of Appeals is supposed to consider only issues that were raised below. In this particular case, it's a strictly legal issue. They're not facts that are contested, although they're sometimes raised in argument just for the atmospherics of it. But the fact of the matter is that this is just a question of interpretation of the statute. And the court will not permit the parties to come in with something brand new that was never considered by the courts below. It will look at the arguments that we bring. There also are likely to be a dozen or so, I would guess, briefs filed, Friends of the Court briefs. And the Friends of the Court actually bring in different perspectives than the parties do. They're intended to help the court with lines of argument or perspectives that it might not otherwise consider. So there will be a very wide range of arguments and perspectives that will be considered in addition to those that are presented by the parties themselves.
Any advice for New Yorkers with high volume truck traffic from Pennsylvania? So the context for this is there are wells being drilled just over the border, about 1.5 miles south of the border. They don't get real close to the border. The reason for that is the laterals are about 1 mile long, and the law in Pennsylvania and in New York is thou shalt not cross the border, thou shalt not get within about 300 feet of the border, and we hope somebody's watching where those things are going underground. But there's a string of well pads about 1.5 miles south of the border, south of the town of Binghamton, south of the town of Vestal. And there is truck traffic going down to those and probably other places further south. A friend of mine and I followed two trucks that were bringing in frac sand, and late at night. And this is twisty, turny roads and hills and all that kind of stuff. And you could smell the brakes. It's the first time I've ever smelled the brakes of a truck, which means they were going about as fast as they could possibly go. They made it okay. We made it okay. It was all okay. But any advice, Joe? I don't know.
Well, in addition to just outright zoning amendments that ban, some towns have been able to pass road protection laws. It's less broad, not as broad would be the better way to say it, but towns have a right to protect their roads. is that one of the exemptions? It's recognized in the law, so it's some towns have found that easier to do. And certainly that's something that we need to think about, because what we've seen in Pennsylvania is that the roads just get ruined. And then you have to try to hold the companies responsible for the ruining your public roads. And so it's much better to think ahead and get road protection laws. If your town is interested in those, let us know, we can help with those. But it's certainly the minimum that can be done. Because, and I see a hand in back there from our experts. So,
no, I'm not. I'm sitting next to the expert. I'm not an expert. That was my question. And I live in Vestal, which is right over the border from Pennsylvania. Can you hear?
no, but that's okay. I can't hear anything.
The question really is about raising awareness among people who live in towns and even in the state about the dangers that we face with all this truck traffic. I mean, just driving on Route 17 or 81, you're seeing waste trucks, you're seeing fracked sand trucks, you're seeing, and I'm just not aware that people are aware that this is going on, and it's something that I would like to do more about, and I just wondered if you had any advice. I live in a town that won't pass a road ordinance. I mean, I went door to door and collected, several thousand signatures. They won't pass it. But I just mean to raise awareness at a larger level of what's actually going on in New York because of what's going on in PA. That was the question.
So what she was getting at, can you hear me now, Joe? I'll try to recycle what she just said, which is how does one raise awareness of this as an issue? That is, okay, fine, they're wrecking roads in Pennsylvania, or they're not, whatever, who cares? How do you raise awareness that it's not just Pennsylvania? And again, my answer to that would be organize and agitate and educate, because that's the wrong sequence, but that's what she was saying.
Well, I should explain that I can't hear questions from the floor because I have a hearing problem that seems to get worse by the day. It's one of those good problems to have. Some of you in your late 60s. I have to just explain that every time I speak. What I would think about doing is, first of all, there's a lot of pictures that one can find on the web of how trucks have turned over onto cars, run into school buses. I mean, there are a lot of horror stories from Pennsylvania that are documented, or that can be easily documented by going down there and working with the people that are victims of this. I mean, those of us who live in rural communities know that our back roads are dangerous enough when they're just cars on. And so this goes back to the ruining of the roads, where there are people that can't leave their houses and even get to the hospital for months because the roads are so muddy, because they've been so ruined. So I would think about searching for pictures on the web, getting videos of problems that are going on down there. One of the things we did in Preble that I didn't mention was one of our group members did a video of Tony's presentation and handed those out to board members. And we had one board member that we thought was very much against this because of other things that he had said when the idea of filing an amicus in support of Dryden at the beginning of the litigation, and he just basically blew up at a town board meeting. We knew we had an issue there. But just presenting him with this DVD, he was very moved by that somebody had taken the trouble to do that. So what we've found is that the more you can reach out to board members and give them educational material, not in a preaching, here's who's talking here. But I think documenting, there's enough proof out there, and if it's going on in New York as a result of what's going on in Pennsylvania, then take videos, get pictures, get statements from people, and build your case. Isaac has something.
there's sand being brought in by rail just about a mile from here, just for reference, and it's being trucked down to Pennsylvania and supplying most of the wells in northeastern PA, right through Binghamton.
Yeah, let me put a somewhat countervailing context on this. I'm monitoring about 5 well pads just south of the border. And these are dirt roads, all dirt roads down in Pennsylvania. I was down watching one well pad, and I drove past another one, the road to the other one, which was deeply rutted. It was absolutely wrecked. This was in the December, when the ground was still somewhat soft, maybe freezing, maybe thawing like that. It was just chewed up, something terrible. There was a big earth-moving machine parked on the side. It was starting to rain. I said, oh crap, I'll come back tomorrow and take some pictures. I came back tomorrow and it was completely fixed. So as context, you need to remember that the drillers have to move on these roads too. And so what we saw when we were monitoring these pads was they were getting the roads were terribly torn up. They had heavy machinery standing by, crews standing by, fixing the roads as they got wrecked. So it's not a real simple case. That is, they don't, in our experience, they didn't get wrecked and they got left wrecked. What Broome County has done, or has started to put in place, I'm not sure the exact status of it, is a road inventory process. How well that's going to work, I don't know. Right now, it doesn't look like drilling is going to show up anytime soon, but the idea is that having an inventory, what do your roads look like now, so that you can document if they change deeply. The last point of contextualization here is the town of Conklin made a deal with the drillers. The Pennsylvania drillers had to use some of the Conklin roads because one of the hard surface roads was in bad shape coming up from Pennsylvania. And so the driller paid the town $20,000 to use their roads. Now, I don't know how that turned out, whether they fixed the roads, and these were back roads that they had to use because the hard surface road wasn't available. So it's not all gloom and doom, but I think what Joe is saying about having educational materials, documenting road conditions ahead of time is going to be important, or having the government officials sign on to documentation of road conditions so that if and when there are problems down the line, they can be dealt with. It's just like if you don't test your water before they drill, depends on what state you live in and all that, you may not have a case for saying that the drillers wrecked it, because they'll argue it was always that way. Same thing with the roads. Okay, Deborah, can you recommend lawyers that can assist towns that want to ban fracking?
Well, I think the recommendations have already been made. I don't know that I would try to put it on for Helen and David to help every single town in the state. I will say that the Natural Resources Defense Council also has a project, and they are, that project is designed to help people do exactly that. So there are lawyers at NRDC, Kate Sinding and Dan Rochelle, who you could also contact for assistance. The Columbia Environmental Law Clinic has helped localities from time to time with local provisions, so there are at least those 3 sources that you can tap for potential assistance. And there are also lots of just land use lawyers around the state who will charge for their services, but who may be available to do it for a reduced rate if they're working for a citizens group or something like that.
How many permanent jobs with pensions did the industry claim the propane storage facility would create? How many jobs?
I think it was less than a handful. The 3, I'm corrected by my better half. Actually, we tried to get that. So we had a public hearing on the proposed moratorium against the propane facility. And the county IDIA shrill, and that's the only thing I would call this man, because the only thing that he sees is dollar signs. I brought in $3 million. Not whether or not you want it in your town or anything like that. He would not And I really had to go around with the lawyer for that board as to why my Freedom of Information request produced absolutely nothing. Because we traced back that in order to submit the application for the railroad spur, they met with the developer a couple of times. There's no records of those meetings in their file. And at first I thought we were just getting stonewalled the way we all did. He didn't know. And so then he came to the meeting and wouldn't answer questions and couldn't answer questions because all he knew was that somebody wanted some money and he could help them get them from a state grant. The business owner came down from Oswego County, which annoyed me, being my home county, and would not tell us what they were planning, and would not tell us how many jobs would be created. So we're just, and then wondered why we were upset. So it was fewer than a handful of jobs. It would have been, and most of these projects, I mean, that's really one of the things that we really need to look at. The job figures that are bragged about by the fracking industry are totally inflated. New York has created more jobs in the last 5 years, many more jobs. There was a New York Times article about this within the last month, than Pennsylvania has created with all of its fracking. And if you really want jobs, let's do some home weatherization and build it sustainable, because that's where the jobs are.
Okay, I just shuffled them. Now the next one up is Williams Engineering has petitioned the New York State Public Service Commission to build another gas gathering line at the West Windsor compressor station site. The PSC is seeking comments specifically on agricultural impact, road construction, noise variances, and oh, there it is, I'm sorry. Yeah, and effects on wildlife. The present station has been open 2 years. In each year there has been a fire and an explosion, entailing county hazmat teams to travel extensive distances and time delays to respond. The question is how to respond to the request for comment in terms of a desire to maintain open lands, agricultural, wildlife, and wetlands. Did that make sense to anybody? I mean, I'm sorry. I know what it meant.
Well, one of the places that I find helpful to start in any town is to go, if you have zoning, and if you have a comprehensive plan, start in the comprehensive plan. Because most towns have very lofty goals in their comprehensive plan, and you'll find that they, for instance, in Preble, it's to preserve the agriculture and to preserve the lakes, things that you argue for that are already built into the comprehensive plan. So that's one way, and remind people that what you're arguing is in support of the comprehensive plan. The other thing is, most of us know Williams has a terrible track record in their compressors and in their pipelines and whatever else they run. Probably one of the worst that I'm aware of. And so I would comment with a detailed series of each of those actions. There's over a half dozen in the last couple of years, and what they have cost communities. And those are things I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay, I'm going to try to move this along. We don't have to leave, so I'm going to try real hard to get all these questions. Can you put geothermal in an existing home? My answer is yes. A neighbor just did that. Joe just told you about it. Are there legal hurdles to overcome to do so?
Overcome what?
Legal hurdles for geothermal in your house.
There weren't in Preble, and we have a pretty comprehensive zoning code.
And I know someone who just did it in Syracuse, and there were no, you just have to have the code compliance officer comes out, looks at your drawings, if they're good and go.
There may be some issues with the water well drilling. I'm trying to investigate that. The state has a half-assed program where they monitor water wells. I think it's designed for drinking water wells, but from my point of view, anything that goes into the ground and goes into surface, into groundwater is a water well. Crap gets in there, contaminate parts of the aquifer. I think it's a nasty gray area. I think there needs to be some compliance clarification on the geothermal wells. Not all geothermal uses wells. Some of it uses a pond. Some of it buries the stuff in the backyard. If a town waits until New York State makes a decision and the decision is in the industry favor, what will be the takings, claims, implications? What will they be at that point if a town decides to ban?
In my view, the takings claims are going to be extremely tenuous. It takes us into some, again, very technical area of the law to talk about takings claims. But if you ban it, certainly before there are any permits, even if it's allowed, and I think that it's going to be almost impossible to establish any kind of takings claim. This is a highly speculative industry. It's going to be very hard for them to say that they have reasonable expectations of, reasonable investment-backed expectations of profiting here without having done major, sort of the geological sampling necessary to establish that they're actually going to recover anything. So I would not advise a town to wait. I think it's a big mistake, especially when you listen to Joe talk about how long and arduous the process can be to really do it correctly. I think it's a big mistake to take that risk. But as long as the laws are passed before there's actual permitting and actual well drilling, I think that there's a very small chance of a sustainable takings claim. Which isn't to say that the industry won't threaten them, but I think that they have a very poor chance of success.
This is for Joe Heath. What was your best argument to not allow the pipeline to be planned through the Preble area? Sole source aquifer, wetlands, or both?
All of the above. We could have another session about how we fought the pipeline. The first thing we were told to do by the people fighting the unconstitutional pipeline to the east of us was to get to the landowners before the landman did. Because rather than playing catch-up the way I've been doing around leases for the last 3 years, it's the same rush, spiel, fraudulent push that comes to your door. And I'll try to be brief because I know we're running out of time. The unconstitutional pipeline, they send letters to the landowners and say, we have evaluated the cost of the value of that easement, just the easement in your land, not all of the rest of the 400 acres, just that easement, and we've got a deal for you. We'll give you 3 times what we say it's worth if you sign within 30 days. If you don't, it goes down to twice. And if you miss the second 30 days, it goes down to time and a half. And if you don't play with us, we're going to take it by eminent domain anyway. That's the kind of rush that they come to people's doors with. And so what we did, we were lucky enough because this pipeline was intended to run up an old easement from an abandoned 6-inch gas pipeline. We had enough volunteers to go out and take GPS readings of all of the road crossings. We had an incredibly skillful mapper then put that into a mapping system so that we have the kinds of maps that you saw here, down to being able to identify every landowner along that route. It was pretty labor intensive. We then mailed every one of those people postcards and had meetings. So we got in front of this and we talked about the environmental issues in each of the communities that we talked about. So it was a, and of course we talked about, I have some great pipeline explosion pictures if you need them. And they happen every day. There was at least one in Kentucky within the last week by one of the companies that owns the one that wants to build here. So it was all of the above, but it was really people getting out, talking. We also sent people door to door. So that's the kind of organizing that we were able to do within a very few months of this. It was really a group effort that it was just wonderful to be a part of.
Does the ruling, I think what's meant is the court case, apply to both bans that evoke police powers as well as bans related to zoning?
Zoning is done pursuant to police powers. Okay, so your zoning is going to be legitimate only if it is considered to be a reasonable exercise of the police powers, meaning that you have a record established showing that it is designed to promote local health, safety, welfare, environmental concerns, aesthetics, things that are part of what goes into developing a community and its economic base. So they're not too different. You know, the police power is what is exercised when you actually adopt zoning, assuming that you do it correctly.
Can a local ban only zone away surface impacts, or can a town zone out the horizontal drill bit?
So that's an open question. Nobody has really tested that yet. The town of Dryden did not want to raise the hardest questions first, which I think was smart, and it admitted that this is a surface issue. Middlefield actually did not say anything about this issue until its brief at the Court of Appeals, and it also has said that what it is doing is regulating the surface of the land. Typically, when you think of land use, you're talking about the surface of the land. It can be, you know, somewhat below the surface of the land. You think about gravel mining, it goes below the surface of the land, obviously, but it affects the surface. I think it is unlikely that a court would uphold a ban, a subsurface ban, unless you could show surface impacts as a result of the subsurface activity, which may or may not be possible to do. Certainly, if you've got a town ringed by wells because they can't go on the surface of the town, but everything's going underneath it, there's likely to be air quality impacts on people nearby. There could be other potential impacts on the surface, and those you might be able to regulate. But in the first instance, people are concerned about the actual land surface.
So the scenario, I think Deborah and I had a discussion about this at one point, I'm recalling. The scenario would be you put the well pad right next to the town border, but not in the town, and you're living in the town right next to the border, and they go ahead and drill laterally and under the town, whatever. You can see how there could be, in effect, a powerful surface impact from air quality, water, you know, all that kind of stuff. So. And there's a little bit of regulatory stuff that I'm going to throw in related to this. The state, in law, says the horizontal drill bit can't get closer than so many feet. I don't remember what it is, 166 feet, 300 feet, to the edge of a drilling unit. There's also a regulation, I think it's in law also, about not getting closer to the state boundary than 300 feet. That really remotely connects, but it's a little bit related to the conceptual part of that issue. Deborah, you appeared on a debate for Colorado Public with Kate Hudson, Public TV, sorry. On that show you stated, "I am not asking for a ban. Can you give Dryden Middlefield a fair defense despite your personal opinion that fracking should occur?"
Well, I think it's a misconception about what I said. This is a debate that was sponsored by Intelligence Squared, and there's a very specific motion that we had to defend or oppose. And I can't remember exactly what the motion was, but my personal opinion is that fracking should not be done anywhere where people do not want it to be done, and where people bring it in, those people are entitled to have the best protections in place that we can get them. As a lawyer, I represent clients, I hope that the town of Dryden thinks that they're getting an adequate defense. I'm not there to represent my own personal point of view. But I'm also not going to tell folks who live in the gas fields, whether they're in Pennsylvania or they're in Colorado, that just because there's no hope of getting a ban where they live, I won't represent them. That's my perspective.
I could say, having watched the Middlefield arguments in Supreme Court and the Third Department in the combined, that these towns are getting the best representation they could. And it's coming from Deborah.
Do you think there is any chance that compulsory integration will be challenged and overturned?
If it hasn't already been challenged, I believe that there are lawyers who are looking deeply into that question. I am not one of them. I haven't really thoroughly analyzed that question, so I'm really not in a position to assess the probability of success. I will tell you that virtually every single state, in fact, every single state that has oil and gas drilling with the exception of Pennsylvania, has compulsory integration of one kind or another, that every time it has been challenged, it has been upheld. So it'll be a difficult case, but obviously it'll all depend upon the specific provisions that are used here in New York and the legal context in which it operates here in the state of New York.
I'll comment briefly. I weighed in I guess it was testimony to New York State Legislature at some point about a year and a half ago, and another fellow weighed in also. He's a lawyer. He had more fancy legal talk. The reading that I made and other people made of compulsory integration of the law itself, which was passed in 2005, is that it is silent about subsurface or surface trespass. That is, it says nothing about whether it can go on the top of your land or underneath your land. It's silent. It was developed before shale fracking came into being, and I think it was a mistake on the part of the legislators and the lobbyists that wrote that legislation. I think they were thinking of the pool concept that Deborah talked about earlier, where you stick a straw in and maybe you're sucking gas from under your neighbor's land, but you're doing it from your land, so you got to do something differently. I think that's what compulsory was designed for. My reading of it says that there's a problem there that needs to be fixed. If you read what it says on the DEC website, that is not an appropriate reading and interpretation of the law. You've got to read the law. Any comments on lawsuit against Como DEC by the Joint Landowners Coalition? That's clear.
That's clear.
Anything else? Okay. More work for lawyers. They put together a lot of money for that. It's got to eat, right? Don't eat cat food. No matter what regulations are in place, can the state truly oversee the industry and make sure the regulations are being followed?
Well, no state has done it yet. It's a very intensive industry. It affects every single environmental resource we know of. No state ever funds the environmental agencies enough to actually monitor, inspect, enforce the laws. Some do it better than others, but I've yet, it's always going to be incumbent upon citizens in the area to help identify problems, and probably incumbent upon groups like Earth Justice to come in and force the state to do its job when it doesn't do the job.
I think
we need to remember that New York has no regulations, and the SDICE is not regulations. They withdrew the regulations after we went to so much trouble to put in all the comments. And we also need to remember that the minerals section of the DEC is so severely understaffed. The last I heard, it had 17 people. Oh my God. So there's no evidence that New York has taken the regulation of this industry at all seriously. And There's nothing in the queue that we can see. There's no regulations coming.
Right. Well, there are currently regulations. The regulations that would be adopted are revisions to those regulations. Those regulations, for the most part, date back to 1971. And there's some minor modifications in 1985. You know, that's before high-volume hydraulic fracturing even kind of came on the scene, which came on the scene in the mid-90s. So we are currently being governed by regulations that were designed for conventional wells. And you know, one of the things that Earth Justice is very concerned about is that we not allow one single permit to be granted before there are new, updated regulations adopted that will actually address the issues that pertain to the unconventional wells. And our view is that whatever the best management practices are for the unconventional wells should apply to all of the wells. What we have right now are just basically outdated practices with a lot of discretion in the division of mineral resources to impose additional special conditions on a permit-by-permit basis to try and protect the environment. That is not the way we ought to be operating. New York is, on paper, way behind most other states where there's oil and gas drilling right now, including places like Texas.
And I'll add to that that New York has refused to participate in some, it's called Stronger. It's a group of states that examine their regulations and practices and make recommendations. New York's refused to participate for the last at least 10 years, something like that, which is, that's scary.
Yeah, it participated, I believe, in the 90s and then refused to adopt any of the recommendations.
What about the takings argument advanced by landowners? Maybe you already asked and answered. Yes. No objection. Okay. Unanimous consent is a concept that I learned from Washington. I really love it. Nobody objects, and away we go. Can you discuss the perceived tax benefit of the gas industry, how it affects the tax levy versus a town budget or school budget? I can talk to that.
Fine.
Okay. The clearest and simplest example is the town of Windsor. The town of Windsor's school tax went down by about 6%. I don't know if the town tax went down. 5.8. Yes, 6%, close enough. That posed some complications actually for the school, but what the landowners paid was 6%, 5.8% less. That's real money. What was that about? Well, the compressor station is a real property. It's a valuable thing. Those compressors, the pipes in the ground, all that stuff is taxable stuff. And it helped the town in that sense. So that's real clear. And just to add on to that, New York State has, towns can and do tax gas wells. The wells are taxed as if they're a real property entity. So if it produces $1 million worth of gas, it's taxed that year as like it was $1 million house. And so that translates into around about, back of the envelope, 4 to 6% taxation on production. There's also some taxation on the facilities, the well pad and the structures and so forth. But the production tax is the fairly big one. And there's a, why not?
Stan, I got a follow-on for Joe and council. 6% of nothing is nothing. If I'm paying $5,000 tax on my property, 6% is $300. That's not a car repair. So what am I getting? I'm getting nothing.
Well, yeah, we understand the arithmetic. Sure, yeah. I'd like to keep moving because I've got a bunch more here. How binding is a resolution? Can it be trumped by a contradictory future resolution? And I presume resolutions are exempt from county review and no need to notify nearby neighbors, nearby towns. Right, resolutions?
It can be the next week or the next month. They could come in and pass an opposite resolution. Just as almost any law can be undone by the body, the legislative body that created it. You do not have to refer it to county planning because it doesn't fit under that provision of Town Law 239M. And you don't have to notify your neighboring towns. And I tried to make that comparison before. It's one we really should stress when we find people crowing about these resolutions. They are undemocratic, and they are about 1/100th of the strength of a zoning ban.
Okay, Joe, is there any chance of fracking being put on the New York State ballot for referendum?
An item goes on to the New York State ballot only after it passes the legislature twice. So it has to go through 2 legislative sessions in the same form, and then it goes onto the ballot for the voters. You know, anybody who's studied the New York State legislature knows that not a whole lot goes through this legislature at all, much less twice. Every now and then you do get some ballot measures. We had 6 of them this year. But it's, you know, given that this, you know, the polling shows that the state is about 50-50 pro and, you know, for and against, the likelihood that we're going to get the legislature, you know, passing, you know, either pro or anti-fracking legislation 2 times, it seems to me to be pretty remote.
It's called a hot potato, I think. Is that all right? Deborah, it sounds like the basis of your argument regarding Dryden Middlefield that you were asking for only the right of communities to zone out fracking. Do you think there is a legal basis for a statewide ban? You just answered that, I think. Legal basis, yeah, sure, but it's politics. It's getting through the legislature. There have been, the Assembly passed a couple of times, I think they passed moratoria, but it didn't get to the Senate. How did the zoning changes in Preble relate to the town's comprehensive plan? I think you maybe answered that.
Well, we certainly referred to the comprehensive plan because it has all of these lofty goals of protecting our farming community, protecting our lakes, protecting our aquifer, and protecting the rural nature of our community. And it certainly is rural. So it fit very well. I have quoted from it more than once when I've made comments in the town. It really is a good place to start when you start working in your town. And if it isn't good enough, then you should think about whether or not you can get your town to make it good enough. Because the way this industry, the way big gas and oil is coming at us, we don't know what they're going to try to come at us with. And we need as good local protection as we can.
Not all towns have a comprehensive plan, by the way. I don't know if apparently it's not required.
It is the better practice, though. And if you think that your zoning law may get challenged, having a comprehensive plan where you can point to and say, you know, we've considered all these factual issues, we have done this in a rational, coherent way, having considered all of the evidence, that will help to sustain the zoning law. You know, the courts repeatedly talk about comprehensive plans and how the zoning is consistent with the comprehensive plan as a way of showing that the exercise of the zoning power was a legitimate exercise of the police power.
We have land leasers on our town board, and our town lawyers law firm works with the consolidation of leasing landowners, coalition, I think it's meant, a group of landowners who lease. What do we do apart from the slow process of replacing all the elected officials? You call Vinny, I think.
I think you answered that one, yes.
I know there are some people here who have worked very hard in some towns and gotten nowhere. And my heart goes out to them because when you have a town run by 5 people who, and there's one party, I mean, we've had some towns where they didn't even have to run a caucus because the Democratic Party was so small that they could take over the Democratic Party. It's very hard. And you just have to keep at it. I've been married 10 years, and when my wife first moved here about 10 years ago, we went to a town board meeting. At the first town board meeting, one of the women town board members stuck her tongue out at her when she made a comment about the environment. So that's how far we've come in 10 years. That same lady is the one that wanted to sell her land to that propane facility. But you just have to stick at it, keep talking to your neighbors, and I just wish there was more I could do to help some towns that I've been involved in.
Just editorially, I'll say that that I understand that there are some efforts for Broome County to put together an entity that will help towns with their politics. How do you run candidates? How do you find candidates? How do you train candidates? How do you get support for candidates, and so on and so forth? That may be happening in the near future. But the point that you have to make here is Joe's point. It takes time. You don't wait until just before the election and say, oh, gee, I want to run for town board. That won't work. It just won't work. It's 2, 3, 5 years out. The gas companies and everybody else, they play the long game. And citizens have to do exactly the same thing. Last question, and then I put this at the end. I did edit. It's an announcement. I guess I'll make it unless I hear objections, and then we could all go home. Was that an objection? I recognize the hand.
It's my announcement, and I was in a virgin meeting.
Well, whatever. You get what you get, right? You put me up here. What is the most viable way of working against fracking? Maybe asked and answered.
In New York, we know what rule number 1 is, and that is, can it get Cuomo to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue? We're in an election year. Normally, he runs around the state secretly and only appears with 6 to 12 hours notice, and it's pretty hard to organize a meaningful protest. He's got to come out publicly this year. We have to keep reminding him that this will not get him to the White House. That's the best way to protect New York. We could change the leadership in the state Senate so that we don't have 2 guys blocking it, taking hundreds of thousands of dollars every year from the gas industry. But those are the 2 main points that I think we could end. Work in your towns. That's been effective.
And this is, we're done here. I'll make Adam's announcement, announcing that Binghamton Regional Sustainability Coalition, in cooperation with the NRDC, the Sierra Club, and Catskill Mountain Keeper, is launching Southern Tier Solar Works, supported by NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. This program launches at the Home Show on March 28th. Is that going to be in Binghamton? Okay.
At Binghamton.
At BU, the place where you can't park and you can't find anything? Okay.
Actually, you can park.
I've been there. I used to work there.
Oh, I know that.
I knew where to park when I worked there. I don't know now. It will include residential, commercial, and something school and industrial scale solar projects. Also a major manufacturing facility. Go to BinghamtonSustainability.org. Next week to get involved or contact Adam Flint. And I can't read your address. Adam is back there. If you're interested, catch him before he leaves. Keep your eyes open for it and go to the Home Show on March 28th. Probably good stuff there. Thank you all for coming. It was nice.